I will give a short preview of the new factions in Total War Rome 2. I've had a chance to try them all, not in a whole lot of battles and not against all different types of builds and factions, but I'm going to give a short preview of the different abilities that the factions have based on their stats and the limited experience I have, and I will come back with a more detailed faction review when I have played more with them. So we're going to start with Massilia, and they are a Celto-Hellenic or Helleno-Celtic faction. For your generals options you have the Massilian cavalry, and these are light, pretty fast cavalry units that are going to be most useful in chasing down enemy skirmishers and rear charging. They have a decent charge bonus. They're pretty cheap, but they won't stand up to dedicated melee cavalry. And they are a general's option, so if you need a really cheap general that you can move around the battlefield quickly, these guys can be pretty nice. Then you have your Massilian hoplites, and these guys are, for their price, they are decent defensive stats, but their melee attack for their price isn't stellar. They do have the armor piercing damage of 8, which is pretty decent, so pretty tanky unit there. The Hippeus have seen an increase in their armor piercing, so now they have 12 armor piercing damage, which is nice. And for their price, they are pretty good shock cavalry that can take care of enemy swords and especially enemy infantry when they are rear charging. So these are pretty decent now, but a bit more expensive. This is nothing new. The Axe Warriors, Celtic Warriors and Thorax Swords. You can do some interesting things with having Thorax Swords as your mainline infantry and then go for Axe Warriors on the flank and to engage heavily armored enemy infantry. For your spear infantry, you have a nice mix of Levy Freemen, light hoplites. The light hoplites have seen an increase in their morale, so it's now 45. And then you have Massilian Thureo spears, and these guys have a pretty damn good charge bonus that is higher than your standard Thureo spears. So they have a charge bonus of 30, and that is very good. So these guys are potentially going to be very annoying when they have used all of their javelins and can go for rear charges and such. Standard hoplites, you have your standard selection of peltasts and skirmishers and slingers, but the mercenary Gallic hunters have had their range increased to 150, which makes them a lot more useful, and now they can snipe from 150 range, which potentially will allow them to get off a few volleys before they are spotted, so pretty useful change for the mercenary Gallic hunters. And for the cavalry, they have light horse and Massilian cavalry, citizen cavalry, and the skirmisher cavalry and Tarentines, fairly standard. So their unique cavalry unit is this very cheap Massilian cavalry that's going to be very useful in dealing with enemy skirmishers. We have Chimeria, and these guys have a pretty interesting roster. For your general, you can go for noble horse archers with 40 missile damage, good melee attack stats, and just overall a solid horse archer unit, or you can go for the Chimerian noble infantry. The Chimerian noble infantry have a nice melee attack for being a spear unit, they have the 8 armor piercing, they have a quite lowish charge bonus for being so expensive, but they are going to be fairly tanky and a solid infantry unit. The only melee infantry you have are these young axes, and they are even cheaper than hillmen. They have nice armor piercing. If you're able to get these guys into the rear of the enemy, they can get kills, but with their 25 morale, they're going to rout and die to just about everything. And here you have your these are basically your Eastern spearmen. Very good bonus versus large. So if you get these guys into cav fights and don't get them charged, they can do very well. And they also have the square formation. So if you manage to put these guys in square, they can actually soak up a cavalry charge or two, but don't expect them to hold for a long time against good enemy shock cavalry. Then you have your standard militia hoplites, and this unit of Scythian hoplites is a very interesting unit, because it has 30 melee attack for 530, it has a bonus versus large of 20 charge bonus, 80 armor, so these guys can be very deadly in melee against units of their own price range, and these guys should probably be your first pick as mainline infantry because they are so cheap. Standard hoplites, Chimerian nobles. Then you have your standard javelins and your slingers. You have the steppe archers, 150 range, 40 missile damage, very good. Then you have your Cimmerian heavy archers, and these guys are pretty awesome. They are expensive, but they do have 35 armor, they have 40 missile damage, 150 range. They do not have heavy shot, but they have precision shots. They are going to shoot 7 shots per minute, and they have a beastly morale of 55. So these guys are going to take a lot of fire, return it, and will be able to defeat many of the skirmishes in the game. Now their kind of most special unit are these picked peltas, and although they have 41 missile damage, they have pretty poor melee stats. So the weapon damage is decent with good armor piercing, their melee attack is on the low side, their charge bonus is terrible, but their morale and armor makes these guys pretty durable. Now the questionable thing is if it's worth bringing these guys at all, because as hybrid units they don't perform very well in melee. They can potentially be useful, just 1 or 2 units to deal damage to high value enemy targets like Oathsworn and units like that, but at least from what I've seen up until now, these are too expensive for what they can do. You have your light step lancers, good for chasing down skirmishers. You have a good selection of step horse archers, armored horse archers, and noble horse archers. And armored and noble horse archers are going to do pretty well when they are rear charging into the enemy in the late game. You have Kolchis, or how you pronounce it, with noble blood, Hippeus, and Kolchian, nobles. Low melee attack, decent weapon damage, overall just your standard tanky hoplite unit. Then they have identical access as Armenia. They have Eastern Spears, Hoplites, and the elite Kolchian Hoplites. Standard Eastern skirmish selection there. And Hippeus Lancers, nothing really special here. Citizen Cavalry, Noble Blood Cavalry. And for Pergamon, we have this unit of Pergamene Noble Cavalry, and it only has 45 armor. It has a very good charge bonus, but it is very expensive for having this low amount of armor. It's very heavy shock cavalry, so it has a high melee attack and it has good weapon damage and all that stuff, so getting into enemy light troops, sword troops and infantry that isn't braced is going to do a lot of damage. And then we have the Galatian swords. And the Galatian swords are your fairly standard, pretty decent types of low tier swords with decent melee attack, good weapon damage, very good charge. That's about it. Good when they are able to charge, flank, stuff like that. You have militia hoplites and Galatian spears. Galatian spears pretty decent against cavalry with their cavalry counter tactics. You have your Thureos spears, and I think there's something funky with the price of Thureos spears, but I'll talk more about that later. Hoplites and your Agema spears, and your Agema spears are potentially an interesting unit because they have a good bonus against large. They have low armor piercing, but a good charge bonus, expert charge defense, and I'm kind of anxious to see how these guys are able to perform against several different units, because they are potentially a strong mainline infantry but a bit on the expensive side. So for your skirmishing options, you have your standard crappy skirmishers, then you have your standard peltasts, your light peltasts, and the pick peltasts. And the pick peltasts have 10 ammo and 41 missile damage, so this makes them potentially very deadly, but they are also expensive. And they are not very good in melee, but they do have a high rate of fire, and they will be able to pour a lot of javelins into units like elephants, chariots, Oathsworn, and other targets of opportunity. But if you compare the Hippeus to the Pergamene Noble Cavalry here, the Hippeus have higher armor, lower charge, a bit lower melee attack, but not by much, and the melee defense of the Pergamene's Noble Cavalry is lower, so it remains to be seen if the Pergamene Noble Cavalry is worth bringing over the Hippeus Lancers. Then you have your standard light horse, citizen cavalry, skirmisher cavalry, and your Tarentines. Now, I guess I've gone over Cimmeria, I've gone over Kolchis, I've gone over Pergamon and Massilia. So I will just show you a few builds that I think could be nice with, and that I've tried with both Massilia and the other factions. Hippeus Lancer as a general, I think that's kind of a no-brainer. For your main line of infantry, you can go for a few thorax swords, some axes on the flanks, some cheap Celtic warriors to soak up charges and get some charges in of their own, some Massilian hoplites, or Massilian Terreo spears, sorry. The Massilian hoplites, a bit on the expensive side for my tastes, but maybe they can be useful. For chasing down enemy skirmishers and rare charging, Massilian cavalry. Then you can bring some more Hippeus with the funds you have left, and maybe some Celtic skirmishers as well. So this army is going to be a bit on the weak side, but has some interesting units that it can possibly go for some more thorax swords to have a stronger thorax line, or if you want to go for more elite infantry, you can go for your Massilian hoplites, bring a strong line of those. Then you probably want to reduce some of the cavalry options so you have more funds to spend on other units and skirmishers. But there can potentially be a decent faction with the axis and thorax sword combination. Still not the strongest options available to it. And then you have Chimeria, and Chimeria is very interesting. If you go for noble horse archers, you have a unit that can spend all of their ammunition and then can charge into melee to engage enemy troops. You also have your Scythian hoplites, and for me these guys are a no-brainer. Bring 6. Then you can bring a mix of Chimerian and steppe archers in order to soak up missile fire. Your picked peltets can be nice in some situations, but I wouldn't really bring them. And bringing steppe lancers, not really a fan of that. You can bring some citizen cavalry in order to be able to stop enemy cavalry, of course. But I don't think I would with your other options, because you have armored horse archers, and bringing 6 armored horse archers of course you can't do that under most tournament rules, but bringing 4 noble horse archers can potentially be very useful. And because these guys are so cheap, you can go heavy on the skirmish. You can go for some Chimerian heavy archers instead of the picked guys, and then you have some funds left. The weakness that Chimeria has is that it's really lacking in melee infantry, and it's lacking in good shock cavalry, so you have to use their skirmishing capabilities to the max. But since these guys are so cheap, that potentially enables you to bring these additional skirmishers, and to also bring some more spear support if you want to go for your cheap steppe spearmen, or if you just want to bring some Chimerian nobles, for example, to have a bit more staying power in melee. And you can also go for more of these picked peltas. So now you have a pretty dangerous skirmishing force and some decent infantry as well. With Colchis, noble blood cavalry for the general, Colchia nobles, Hippeus lancer. A noble blood general is a solid choice. A Hippeus lancer might be better against chariots and such, but they are kind of limited in their skirmishing capabilities. So this faction lends itself to maybe some hoplites, some Kartli X-Men, hoplites for holding the center, some eastern slingers are always nice to have, and for your cavalry you have Hippeus and noble blood, so you can tank up on the noble blood and be able to do fairly well in most cavalry engagements, unless you're charging in against really elite enemy cavalry units. You can also just bring some extra eastern spears, for example, and this wouldn't be the strongest build, but it can potentially deal with some of the other enemy factions. And for Pergamon, we have you can either go for a strong infantry corps of Agema spears backed up by very cheap Galatian swords. And then you can, if you're going to go for a sort of a rush here, you can go for your picked peltasts, and then you can go for some Hippeus, for example. Go for some Hippeus lancers. If you want to go more cav heavy, you can bring more Hippeus, or if you want to go for a more balanced type of Pergamon build, you can go for example, Pergamene noble general. You can have some light swords. You can have your levy pikes hold the center. You can have your some spears on the sides to protect from enemy cavalry. Go for some, but that's the problem. They don't have any really good long-range skirmishers. So they mostly rely on short-range killing power in their skirmishers. Go for some light horse to hunt down enemy skirmishers, and then you can go for some additional Hippeus, maybe another Pergamene noble. So I think out of the factions, I think I prefer Chimeria the most, actually. Looks like it can be very fun to play with. And I tried Chimeria a bit more than the two other factions, because I think Chimeria can be pretty damn awesome. And in large part because of the very cheap and cost-effective Scythian Hoplites. So that's it, a short preview. I will come back with a more detailed review of the new factions when I have the time to play with them more and see which factions they can do well against and see which factions they don't do so well against. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again on the battlefield.